So I get to give us all the bad news, show a lot of the examples of people making mistakes. So if your company's in any of the slides, just let me know afterwards. And then I've tried to client X as many of them as I could. I actually got in trouble recently because I had shown someone's site and they were in the room and they didn't like it because their boss was there too. So if yours is here, sorry. But hopefully we can use a lot of these examples of mistakes people are making. Last night I had a chance to speak with some of the other speakers, and one of the things we were talking about was related to this is how many of these things are actually search problems and how many are business problems and things that we should fix outside of search. So as Gemma said, I've been doing this a very long time, so over 20 years. I mainly focus on working on large-scale problems for bigger companies. Two things we specifically do. We have a tool called Data Prism where we mine keyword and insight data, and then we built an industrial strength href language tool because we're finding that's where a lot of people are having problems, especially on the enterprise. So if we break down where the problems happen, they tend to be in four specific areas. One of these areas is language and culture, and this one we make the obvious mistake, translate things incorrectly or don't translate things. Others are CMS site infrastructure. Geo-targeting is also typically part of that, but I broke it out because we got some really good examples of what people are doing wrong. And then organizational issues that we see. I find that global search, most people treat it as individual country silos, but you need to think about it a little more holistically. I have a series of questions that I typically get from people, and then when we look at why they're having this problem, you can often see some of these challenges and problems. And one we get a lot is, I get very little traffic to our local market sites despite localizing it into the local language. So what's the first problem you think you might have with that? If you have a local language site but nobody comes to it. Maybe use the wrong words, maybe use the wrong language, a whole host of things. One of these we see is like this with Japanese, where almost every single thing on the page is wrong. Not only is it the wrong keywords, but it's in the wrong order, things are in the wrong place. And one of the reasons is, especially on smaller sites, a lot of people use tools like this, these string translation tools that's a plug-in to WordPress. So thinking that this piece of text or this button, it's the same thing in every language or the same order. And so we often see a lot of these type of problems. And it's because people get lazy and do things like this. We see a lot of cut and paste where people will just copy it out of something like Excel, which often doesn't work with a lot of Asian languages, and just paste it in. Other things we see like this, so it's a lot of times when you get things translated, they might use the wrong word from a popularity standpoint. So this is another Japanese example where here they actually use the region of Champagne versus Champagne. So technically are the same thing, but one word, if you could see the query volume here, is 33,000 searches a month versus 5,400 searches a month. More interesting is the cost per click is almost twice as much for the less popular word. And the reason they use this is it sounded more prestigious. It sounded like it was, a higher level, it was a more expensive project. In the end, when we actually figured out why they used it, is because Dom Perignon was using that word. So the people they were competing with, a more expensive product was using the more expensive word, or the more sort of prestigious sounding word. That's why they used it. And nobody said, hey, how about we go after the one that has more searches and then introduce them to the bigger sounding word. So this is another one we see a lot, is people use the wrong word. Another was they forget to localize the meta description, and this is one we see quite a bit, either the meta description or the page. Now, a lot of times with sites, the more creative your site is, oftentimes you don't have a lot of text on the page. And one thing we're seeing now is a number of companies are starting to take away their meta description mainly because Google can often do a better job of building one than you can write yourself. But places like your homepage and things like that, if there's no text because you've got a great company logo or maybe a couple products, there is no text. And this is an example here. I did this search in Germany for this company and everything came up English because nobody was translating the meta description. And there was nothing on the page to be used for the local language. This is one we're starting to see a lot more. People are using different plugins to localize their website. So one thing to notice here is when I click on the French language version, the main thing I wanted to point out was the URL. When I go from the French language version to the English language by simply clicking English language, the URL doesn't change. So which language is that URL in? Is it in English? Is it in French? Is it in German? What is it? And that's the problem that we have. In this case, while all the navigation and everything changes to English, some of the content doesn't because nobody checked all the different pieces that are working there. But that's the big question. Who gets this listing? Now, Google's doing a decent job. If I do the query in French, the French page does come up. Google does accommodate. Notice the same page, Google will change the title tag to sports apparel, even though the title tag is exactly the same. When I do the query in English, it comes up changing it yet again. But because that content wasn't changed inside the page, Google's showing even the English version. They're showing it in French. So the problem with this is exactly that. With a single URL representing multiple languages, which language gets it? If Google comes today, gets the German version, and then comes tomorrow and gets the French version or Spanish version, which one do they index? It's the same URL. And so they're getting better about being able to accommodate it from multiple countries. But this is a big problem. So if your company is using a single URL and using some of these Java replacement tools, go check some of the markets. It's often the number one reason why people don't show up in other languages. Here's the other one. This is one of my favorites. So doing a lot of href language, I encounter this. Anybody know the population of the Northern Mariana Islands? Want to guess? It's a series of islands, about 50,000 is the actual population. But notice what they've done is they created a version of their site for it, and there's two versions in Chinese, a Japanese, French, Spanish, and English version for that tiny island. And we ask them, why do you have all these extra versions? And they're like, well, I paid to have it translated into Japanese, so I'm going to use it everywhere. So why not have just a Japanese one? And you see this a lot. Here's Puerto Rico. They've even got two versions of Chinese, Japanese, and French, and same thing, and Mexico being the Mecca of Japanese and French, you probably want to have those there as well. But it added 5 million extra pages. And there's a difference when we think about this. There's no reason I can't have the button to change the language if I'm in the Northern Marianas Islands, or if I'm here in Barcelona and I want to see it in French, to have a French version. There's no reason for me to have a page, with like the ES/FR in the index. That's the main point of this. So just because you can doesn't mean you should. And no need to overdo these translated versions. All right, another one we get is we get very little sales from our local markets despite ranking very well and spending a fortune on SEO. So think about what they're asking there. We don't get many sales, but we rank well, and we spend a lot of money on SEO. What do you think the problem is? Price could be that. So I think with price, it could be currency. But that's the key points. Probably some other page is ranking. And this is one of the things. Most people get a rank report like this that says in Spain, you have this many pages, this many words ranking number 1, number 2, page 1, page 2, and nobody's looking at what page it is. And so you could have the illusion that you're ranking very well, but not actually have the right page ranking well. And this is one of the things you may want to look at is when you pull back a rank report, you can take that rank report and just simply do a pivot table and see how many of the pages that are ranking in Spain are actually Spain's pages, or your ES version of your site. Anybody do this to see which version of a site is actually ranking in a country? Because I don't see many big companies doing this. And so that's one thing we see, especially with the UK and Australia, where it's a very similar language, and we often see UK pages ranking in Australia. And I'll show you examples of why this is a problem later. But this is a big one that people, an SEO just cares that something ranks, not necessarily it's the right page.